Anyone can end up in the psychiatric unit, you know, having a breakdown. When I was 17 and in the hospital for nearly 6 months, I didn't think I'd ever come out. It was almost like a prison sentence.
There's almost sometimes on occasion a brutality in the treatment, in that people are put down because they have a mental illness, and faith, the two aren't seen as being compatible.
He wants to see you meet you in your situation. He understands your situation and he wants you to live in his presence.
Well, discussing my faith with staff or with anyone else, it wasn't particularly encouraged. In a way, I thought that, you know, it was a question of, it was just avoiding the issue, avoiding me, part of me.
And there's this old thing about the psychiatrist being God, so there's not room for two gods in treatment. There are no pictures of me as a child at all. And so I suppose I became interested in why other people took photos. I like photography. I suppose it's tied up with my faith. And there's something beyond the photograph that has a spirituality of its own. Something outside of me has put the frost on the bush or has put the catkins on the tree. Faith became part of my life when I was about 12, when the school that I was attending did Murder in the Cathedral as their school play. I'd never really seen the communion before. And when the girl that was playing Thomas à Becket held up the wafer and was doing this body and blood bit, it absolutely screamed at me. It screamed to something inside me.
All honour and glory be yours, O loving Father, forever and ever.
The vast majority of my life hinges on my faith. That doesn't make me a goody-goody, because I can cuss and swear and, you know, drive up someone's backside if they've annoyed me or whatever. But it's my framework, it's part of me. For me, spirituality is the God-shaped hole in me that only God satisfies, that only the things of God and maybe the people of God satisfies. It's the bit of me that communes with God.
I think that the relationship between religion and spirituality is complex, really. They overlap one another. Father, hear our prayers and answer them.
What I've understood religion to mean is something to do with rituals, and spirituality to do with your inner self. For Muslims, the rituals are part of the inner self. You can't separate either of them. We use the term religion to describe Islam, but actually the Arabic word is deen. We say Islam is our deen, which means it's your way of life.
I think spirituality is actually rather difficult to define. Within each of the faith communities, there would be particular understandings of it, but we live at a time now when many people don't feel at home in any of those faith communities, and yet spirituality seems to be an important word. I mean, for me, it really comes down to very simple things, like what keeps people's spirits up, what gives people a sense of meaning and purpose and direction. You know, what do people live for? What makes life feel worthwhile?
I think there are aspects of spirituality in so many things. Walking in the countryside or painting a picture, music. You know, there are many roads to it. You can't say that, oh, right, this is the only way. There's a stillness attached to it. It's not noisy and impatient or whatever.
It's about going to your inner self. I've grown up in a noisy household. I have a noisy household now. So how do you find that space to sort of center yourself, to find yourself, and to ask yourself the questions of all the things I'm doing in my life? Am I doing them because I really want to do them? Do I need to do them? Are they benefiting me in any way? That, to me, is a spiritual process where you're out in the outside world, but then you go inside yourself.
It's often when people are unwell that these huge questions come back into their lives. Who am I? What am I doing with my life? What should I be doing? And it's often then that people are looking at what they've got in their own life experience or from other traditions or communities which might help them.
Well, my faith gives me, it's really an anchor to the soul. Gives me something that I can't really get elsewhere, particularly with going to services, being part of a fellowship, being part of a community.
We know from user surveys that over half patients who suffer a serious breakdown rely heavily on their spiritual and religious beliefs to get them through. And yet, most of those people can't tell the psychiatrist about it.
I saw a young man a couple of weeks ago who would see himself very much as a child of God. But he's learnt that in his conversations with his psychiatrist that he can't use that language. His psychiatrist feels that his religious beliefs are part of his illness, and the sooner he ditches them, the better he will be.
To 90% of the general population have the belief in God or a higher spiritual presence or being. Less than a third of psychologists and psychiatrists hold such belief. So here is a mismatch between the belief system of most of the people seeking help and those people offering it.
I think they thought that if I spoke about it, I might perhaps have a manic episode. You know, it might spark it off, as it were.
If we argue that the reason why services are provided in the first place is to meet the multidimensional needs of the population of a particular area, you have to take on board all aspects of that person. You can't pick and choose what suits you because it's politically correct.
They can make a sweeping generalisation. You've been indoctrinated with religion, and that has somehow messed you up. But I think that's an easy thing to latch onto. It makes their life a lot easier, of course, if they can keep you at a distance, see you as, well, he's a person that's a bit of a religious nut.
I think often clinicians have seen the destructive nature of religion, that it can make people feel guilty, unworthy, and certainly we see that in our work still.
The climate of psychiatry and medicine as a whole has been unwelcoming to matters spiritual. And only in recent years, with the emergence of a lot of research which correlates mental health and spirituality in a positive way, actually it correlates health and spirituality in a very positive way. That information is enormously important because it's encouraging myself and other physicians and psychiatrists to take a much closer look at the spiritual aspects of mental health.
The medical model in psychiatry is very powerful and I think very important. I mean, at the end of the day, there are certain recognisable patterns of mental illness. The medical model has been able to identify them, and increasingly with the new generations of drugs and things, is able to address them. It's been easy for us to think that this is the way in which, say, mental illness would be cracked. You know, it would be through physical methods and treatments and so on. But actually, you know, human beings are more than just chemistry. We're people. We flourish in relationship. And that is a spiritual thing. And so any approach to mental health which leaves out the relationship, the spiritual dimension, I think ultimately something very important is missing.
In the history of psychiatry, religious ideas have had a bad press. They've been associated with major mental illness, abnormal thoughts, delusions. But there has been a whole movement, particularly in America, to look again at what we understand by people's religious experience and not to pathologize it.
Mental illness can be particularly frightening because if there's something wrong with me physically, usually my mind is reasonably intact and I can sort of think about what's wrong in a measured way. But if I start to become mentally ill, then my kind of capacity to understand what's happening to myself and the way I experience the world starts to get disturbed.
A lot of patients, when they have a breakdown, do have profound spiritual experiences because it brings them to that sense of coming to the edge.
In times of crisis, I think some people go back to the things that give them strength and comfort and have been a part of their lives. And religious faith is sometimes a great comfort, but it's quite ambiguous too, because often religious ideas can be quite painful.
I think that when the mind breaks down, as it does sometimes in psychosis, it's as if the fine nuances of our ability to think get lost. And it's almost as if we fall back on certain very kind of strong, primitive patterns and experiences in the mind. And it's those patterns that we find, well, in all the religions, repeated everywhere. And so there often is this coherence between inner individual experience and outer religious expression.
I remember a woman who became the goddess Kali in a day centre, dancing round the day centre, which was quite a powerful experience for us all. But when you looked at what was happening in her life, she was so vulnerable and all the boundaries and certainties in her life had broken down. And I think often I see people who've reached out to become Christ or some god or some heroic figure, because this is a way of hanging on for them.
I think professionals sometimes feel out of their depth in these areas of spirituality. If one of their patients starts raising questions, it's actually going to raise questions for the mental health professional.
And doctors, nurses, and staff on the ward find it difficult because it is quite an intimate thing, faith. It's very intimate, it's very personal to you, to the individual.
It's easy for all of us to kind of step back into a professional role and try and protect ourselves by keeping everything demarcated and saying, well, this isn't my business, and creating a rationalization like, well, you know, I'm not going to raise these questions with patients because they might be too disturbing for the patients, whereas actually the truth is that they might be too disturbing for me.
When they know you have a faith, I think they think, well, what would it be like to have a faith like that, or something that they haven't explored? So it kind of, I think it challenges them.
Doctors are like anybody else. They have areas of certainty, of competence, and they have areas of doubt, questioning, and misgivings. Now, our role traditionally has been very much to be the one who knows.
I might have spiritual beliefs, but I don't believe in God. So if I'm faced with a patient who is saying to me, but how can God do this to me? You know, I've worshipped him all these years, I've loved him all these years. I do find that quite challenging, to know what to say in return.
None of us want to get into a conversation where we're going to be floundering out of our own depth. But in this area, perhaps beyond any other area, we all are out of our depths. And it isn't required that the mental health professional should know all the answers.
The raw material is actually in the person themselves, and I think if you sit and talk to them, quite soon they'll tell you what their needs are, what their beliefs are.
We're very good at taking social histories, family histories, medical histories, but we don't inquire about spiritual and religious beliefs except to say, you know, what's your religion? It's just a tick in a box.
If you want to know something about me, you've got to know what I believe in, what I think, how I live my everyday life. And so therefore, as a Muslim, I would say, I want those aspects of myself understood, and I don't think they are.
We're thinking at the moment in the Trust about what's going to be called the patient's journey, an online record of the person's journey through our service. And part of the assessment programme will be a spiritual assessment. What your reactions are if somebody says there ought to be a an assessment of a person's spiritual needs, really.
I think it's all help. Where do we go to next?
Some staff would be keen to use this assessment tool, but it's like, do we know enough about spirituality to be able to do this?
There are some very simple questions that we can ask which open up this area for discussion if it's relevant. Questions like, do you have a spiritual or religious belief or faith? In childhood, was that part of your life? Did it have a helpful effect, or did it create problems for you? Do you turn to spiritual or religious beliefs when you're under stress? Does this affect the way you see treatment going? Does it influence how you think about taking medication? You can very quickly find out easily whether this is a matter of concern to the person.
I think it's really important that sometimes there's a space for people to say the unspeakable or the unthinkable, and not for people to react quickly and speedily and say, you mustn't. A lot of our work is to help people to find their own inner resources, and we're there just simply to be the space where they do that. People in teams are more willing now to talk to the chaplaincy about people's spirituality and to consider that this might be a very vital part of this person's recovery and well-being. So I think there's going to be an increasing need for dialogue and training with members of staff. So there might be another way of working with this.
Training issues need to be looked at right back at college, because I'm still quite new from college, then it's still in my mind that we probably only had a very short lecture on spiritual needs, and that was the only way it was addressed within college.
The way professionals are trained, for example, frontline counsellors and the sort of other levels of, professionals, it's not something that's really dealt with at all in any meaningful way.
For me, spirituality almost goes hand in hand with cultural issues, and I feel quite ignorant on a lot of different cultures.
Why does a woman have to cover her face and wear that black? It makes me feel afraid. It makes me feel that what's she covering, what's she hiding? So how do you demystify that? How do you break that down? How do you stop that fear?
Mental health services have traditionally been services that have been developed very much along what I call Western, Eurocentric ways of seeing the world. And in East London, we've got a community now in the majority, or communities, which have a very different way of seeing the world.
For research that Nigel did, looking at the spiritual needs of people who suffered with mental health issues in Newham, and found that the needs were not being met. So recommendation was to set up this department.
It seemed to me that it was an anachronism having a chaplain. If you look at it across East London, if you take the Muslim population, the Hindu population, the Sikh population, the Buddhist population, the Jewish population, the black Christian population, they are the ones which are the largest groups. What we needed was a team of people who reflected the traditions of those communities. We have some people who are psychologists, others who are nurses, others who are trained as youth workers, social workers, therapists, some as ministers. So we have a wide range within the team, and some who speak different languages, of course.
When I was brought up in a black majority church, and looking back now, I saw people who were suffering. I remember clearly this person who had schizophrenia, and the way he was ostracised, if you like, and pushed into one corner because people didn't know what to say, how to deal with this person, laughed at sometimes, ridiculed. And as I've gone through nursing, coming to this work, I've actually heard people come to talk to me and saying what they are actually experiencing. And I've actually heard patients come in and say, oh, it's because I've not been reading my Bible enough, I've not been praying enough. My minister says this, my faith leader has said that, which I think can be so dangerous. So people are still experiencing this stigma, this taboo is still there. We really need to take this on board and do something about it. And even if you start with one group of people, I think it's going to branch off from there.
Part of our job is to liaise and go out into the community and meet the faith community leaders to find out how do they support people in the community who do have a mental illness.
If you can really support someone holistically and really understand their whole world and help that person not to feel isolated from their natural support systems, i.e. the community from which they come, then I think they're going to want to use mental health services more.
We sometimes have...
The fact is, at the moment, they don't want to use them, and all the statistics show that. And that's understandable, because most of the time we in the mental health services are seen to be not sensitive enough to their needs.
When people come onto the wards, they bring with them their culture, their faith, and their belief system, so you have to respect that.
It will be very traumatic for them because, first of all, they will be afraid if this organisation or institution or place understands them. Chances are they will think that it doesn't understand them. They will think that they're going to be judged. They will think, well, maybe something that they're going to do to me will be not compatible with my belief system.
We're trying to do more training on the wards around issues that directly affect the care of patients on the wards, so that the ward settings can be much more holistic in their response to the needs of people.
Every month we look up and see what religious festivals are taking place. We type it out, and I personally go and give it to each ward to raise awareness that this is a special occasion. And in the past we've celebrated Diwali, we've celebrated Eid. We have a Christian service provided every week. It's bringing the home into the hospital, so for the well-being, we're trying to integrate the two together. Most of the communities, the first port of call is there, either the church, the temple or the mosque.
Basically, they're looking for sanctuary. I think at the moment Muslims are not necessarily looking for services from the mosques because they're not resourced to do that, but they're going to look for some mental ease.
But is there somebody, a layman, who you think would benefit from coming and learning, who has some understanding about, or is willing to learn about mental illness? We've got Muslims, we've got Sikhs, so we've got Hindus. So we want to build, from the community, what
we want to do is reach out to both the faith communities and the different cultures, and reach out to our colleagues in the mental health service, so that there can be created a dialogue between these different worlds.
Because you see, then we would also like the person who's being trained with us to come and visit patients on the ward.
There is a huge resource in faith communities which we can form a partnership with to help the service user. And there is a huge resource with the voluntary sector, who are involved in doing lots of excellent work in terms of the area of preventative mental health. And that's why we've formed the link, particularly with Jewish Care.
People that have mental health problems, they are isolated, they feel stigmatised, they're lonely, they've been institutionalised and therefore cut off from the Jewish community. And what Jewish Care try and provide is a Jewish way of life. We have an outreach team, we have an employment project, day centre services, all within the mental health remit under the umbrella of Jewish Care. For a lot of people, this is really important, to have that sense of belonging.
The workers in our team that come from the Jewish community are trying to work with the wards in Hackney to especially be much more aware and sensitive to the needs of the Jewish patients, particularly from the Orthodox community that come on the wards. And there are lots of issues around gender, diet, spiritual needs around festivals, how to make space for people.
People who want to actually do the ritual prayer and they want to read their holy scriptures and things, I think people feel really uncomfortable with it. And it's, okay, leave them alone, but leave them alone in a sense that this is something that they feel like they have to do, but not really connected to perhaps their healing process.
Everybody practices their religion in their own way. Every religion has certain ways that they pray.
You say Ya Latif, which is one of who gives ease, one of the names of God, of Allah. So therefore you're asking Allah to give you ease. So it's something you keep saying to yourself, Ya Latif, and you get inspiration from that.
If the staff are unaware of what the protocol is, what the procedure is, how they practice their religion, it can be interpreted as something part of their mental illness. It can be misinterpreted. It can be thought that somebody is being difficult and awkward unless they are aware of the spiritual and cultural needs of that particular patient. And if they have that understanding, then it can enable somebody to feel comfortable in an environment that is quite can be quite hostile to them.
We have to move away from a much more purely medical model to a much more holistic model of care. And I believe what our department about is constantly trying to advocate for that. In dialogue together, hopefully we'll get to a point at some stage, on the one hand, that the mental health service will be much more sensitive to the holistic needs of people, and also the faith communities can work much more closely at supporting people in their own communities. And many of those communities have massive taboos around mental illness and mental health problems.
It's almost seen as a weakness. Or if you've got a weak mind, you're not much used to society.
I see more and more people for whom their faith communities become places of great pain or loneliness.
I'm Terence and I suffer from depression, but that's not who I am. That's not how I live my life. I was born and lived in Southampton, went to art school, got a first-class degree at Winchester School of Art. Then I ended up doing a print design job. I could be described as a Christian, but not full-on, hallelujah. Someone will save you, because if there is a God, all you could expect really is to get strength from it, because we're down here, we have to get on with our lives. I've had bouts of depression since I was 18. I came back to London last February. I didn't actually have any work. I didn't have that many friends, and I just had a real crisis, and I had a bad bout of depression, and I was actually suicidal for about 6 weeks.
So often, if I suffer from a mental illness, what happens is I lose my community, I lose my friend, I lose my work environment. And yet, how can I get better if I can't be part of a group of people who care about me?
A lot of people who we find coming back to chapel are literally refugees from a world which is not ready to respect or to adapt life so that people can be supported well.
The church has pushed them to the edge, maybe their families or maybe staff have pushed them to the edge. In the Bible study group, we either want to go out to the edge and be with them, or to make it feel safe enough for them to come in and be with us.
It's an integral part of my life and my recovery. It's very supportive, and it offers emotional support that you can't get from therapists. I can go along, and if I'm in a really foul mood, I could still go. I can sit there in tears, or I can sit there laughing.
From being apparently a sort of simple Bible study, it became a refuge for people and a safe place where they were included, not judged.
The acceptance in the group stems to all areas of life. So, like, I'm gay and I go to the group, there's other gay people there, there's alcoholics. You can't go to lots of churches, for instance, if you're gay, because they don't like it. They have trouble accepting it, and they try to convert people, say it's a sin. So it's really good to find a place that I can go to that's spiritual-based and accepting of all things.
The group deals with the problems of mental illness and how we cope with those things, and asks questions about faith and belief and how we see ourselves and the world.
For people to have a safe place is very important, because in the main people don't see a psychiatric hospital as being a safe place.
It's what's changed me as an individual. And although I'm not a Christian in the sense that a lot of those people are, I can see it working in other people's lives.
Some people would think that feelings or thoughts or perceptions of the world were peripheral. But in fact, of course, they're vital. That often that's the thing that is the most powerful part of recovery is learning to find new purpose or meaning or direction for yourself.
Through the Association of Pastoral Care and Mental Health, I was asked to give some sort of art, creative workshop to people, and because I'm a professional artist, it was a way I could use my skills, and it also bridged a gap in the community because lots of daycares shut down and people haven't got anywhere to go. It provides a social lifeline. It's not therapy-based, it's somewhere where people can go away to get away from their problems for 2 hours. And it also has built my self-confidence, being able to talk to people and having a responsibility for something after not working for a year. It just makes me feel that I'm on the right path and that my spirituality is growing and that I can help other people that haven't been very well.
Part and parcel of our Western tradition in science has been the idea that if something's broken, you can fix it. But a lot of illness in relation to the whole of health, and certainly mental health, isn't really like that. It's much more to do with a shattering of the self, a dis-ease.
For me, it's about being able to reach that person, to meet them at their point of need, to meet them at their level and not rush them into getting well. And I think for spirituality, I think that helps you along the way, you know, to heal, to get well.